Okay.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Scott Wolf. I'm Executive Director of Grow Smart Rhode Island, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the first panel discussion in our online Power Place Summit series. We originally, of course, planned
John, I can't hear Scott. I assume
that's he's frozen. Well, I'll continue for Scott if you can hear me.
and many speakers. As a reminder, our webinar series will culminate with a half-day plenary on September 25th, featuring Scott Spencer of the Annie E. Casey Foundation and award-winning Washington Post columnist E.J. Dion. Now on to some logistics for today's session before I turn it over to our panelists and moderator. If you registered for just today's panel discussion, there's still time series, including the plenary. Just visit growsmartri.org for details. Today's format will include brief presentations by each of our panelists, followed by discussion. You'll be able to submit questions through the chat function in Zoom. And within the next several days, if all goes according to plan, you'll receive a recording of today's session. We want to thank our many sponsors who are making this non-traditional summit possible. You can see them here on your screen. We appreciate their generosity, their flexibility, and their nimbleness in embracing our new format. And I'm especially proud of the number and the diversity of sponsors we've assembled, more than 60 in all. They're leading organizations in a variety of fields, including business, development, engineering, architecture, planning, finance, historic preservations, and to thank them when you are in contact with them for the commitment to community betterment. Now, to set the focus for today's session and to introduce today's panelists, I'm pleased to turn things over to our moderator, Martha Werenfels, who is a longtime Grow Smart Rhode Island board member and an outstanding architect, regional placemaker, and community designer. Martha, thanks for leading us forward today. Looking forward to all the proceedings.
Thank you very much, Scott. We're really excited today to have three terrific panelists, and they represent not only Rhode Island, but Massachusetts and Connecticut as well. So Rhode Island being very connected to our neighbors, I think this is a really important session to bring together experiences and thoughts from experts in our neighboring states, as well as experts in Rhode Island. Our first speaker is Kirsten Bryan, who's the Deputy Director of City Planning for the City of New Bedford. Kirsten also has prior experience with statewide planning here in Rhode Island, so she can bring both perspectives to her talk. We also have with us Patrick McMahon, who is the CEO of the Connecticut Main Street Center. And our third speaker will be Garrett Mancieri, who is the Executive Director of the Downtown Woonsocket Collaborative, and he's also a licensed realtor. So we're hoping that these three speakers will be able to shed light on their experiences with revitalizing main streets. And of course, we have the overlay of other circumstances right now, very challenging circumstances, which we hope will be able to provide opportunities as well in terms of what people are thinking about with respect to main streets. I'd like to mention that I took a quick look at the list of participants last night, and we have a wonderful group of participants representing the Department of Administration, higher ed institutions, Senator Whitehouse's office, HUD, RIPTA. We also have representatives from the towns and cities of East Providence, Middletown, Newport, Pawtucket, Westerly, and Tiverton. So I'm really excited to hear everybody's input, and as Scott said, we will be accepting questions via the chat function in the Zoom meeting, and please do submit questions. This is a panel discussion, and so we really want a lot of audience participation. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Kirsten and Bryan.
Thank you, Martha, and thank you, GrowSmart. I'm very excited to be here. So I am going to share my screen with my presentation. So thank you again, Martha, for the introduction, and good morning to everyone. My name is Kirsten Bryan, and I am the Deputy Director of the Department of City Planning in New Bedford, Massachusetts. Today, I plan to discuss New Bedford's historic downtown and main streets and how they intersect with public spaces and public art. So I want to start by giving some quick stats about New Bedford. Our population is just over 95,000. New Bedford also has the #1 commercial fishing port in the United States and has been the #1 commercial fishing port in the US for the past 18 years. In terms of transportation and connectivity, we have a bus terminal, we have many bike paths, we have a ferry that offers service, we have a regional airport, and we also have 2 anticipated rail platforms coming to the city. Here's a map of an aerial image of New Bedford, and the yellow box, which I'm going to talk about more in the presentation, represents the downtown. So here's a map of New Bedford's downtown. So the pink polygon that you see on your screen, that's our downtown. The 4 lines that you see here are representative of our main streets. So we have Union Street, Pleasant Street, Purchase Street, and Acushnet Ave. Our main streets offer a mix of residential and commercial. We have several bars, restaurants, we have a hotel, medical offices, residential. We have municipal facilities like our library, community centers, and many more that are offered on these 4 main streets. In addition, you'll see a few other features on the map. The green polygon that's outside of downtown and inclusive of downtown is the New Bedford, oh, I'm sorry, I advanced a slide. The green polygon is the New Bedford Whaling National Historic Park. The purple polygon that you'll see here is our local Bedford Historic District. So we have 2 historic districts that intersect with our downtown area. 2 other locations that I want to point out to you are Wings Court here and Custom House Square. Those are 2 of our main public spaces in the downtown, and I'll talk more about those. But first, I'd like to mention that in addition to being a historic city, New Bedford is a very artistic city as well. So our downtown has historic buildings and several murals, and I'm going to share a few pictures with you. So these are some of our historic buildings in the downtown. This is Custom House in Custom House Square, the Double Bank Building. This is North Water Street, which has several historic buildings, and they house eateries and small businesses. Here's 7th Street, and this is a really historic neighborhood with fixtures like the Nathan and Polly Johnson House, which is here. This was a landmark site for the Underground Railroad, former home of Frederick Douglass, and is now home to the New Bedford Historical Society. And here's some of our murals that we have throughout the downtown. This is the Love Mural in Wings Court. This is a mural on William Street depicting a historical scene with Frederick Douglass featured here. And that's right across from Custom House Square. Here's another mural on South 6th Street, which features Frederick Douglass as well. And finally, here's another mural that's right in between Wings Court and Custom House Square. So 2 of the ways that New Bedford has activated the downtown is making enhancements in their public spaces. And I want to talk about 2 of those sites with you today. So the first is Wings Court and the second is Custom House Square. Wings Court is located here, and Custom House Square is just separated by Acushnet Ave from Wings Court, located here. And you can see that they're very close closely knit in between our main streets. So here's another close-up aerial shot featuring Wings Court and Custom House Square. Wings Court is depicted on the left-hand side of your screen, and prior to being Wings Court, there was a department store called Wings located in the space. However, there was a fire and subsequent demolition. The area was established as a public space in 1986. You can see that it's uniquely situated between buildings, and it also has 3 access points, and each of those access points are our main streets. So this is Purchase Street, Union Street, and Acushnet Ave. And here's Custom House Square. Prior to 2013, Custom House Square was actually a parking lot. So the first enhancement I'll talk about is the Wings Court Lighting Enhancement Project. So this project was made possible through a local placemaking grant program where UMass Dartmouth CVPA, a professor there, led her students to develop conceptual lighting enhancements for the space. The city partnered with the college on implementation, and as a result, there are now 3 separate light canopies with Edison-style bulbs and several solar bollards, which you can see here, now available in the space. The enhanced lighting has definitely attracted more people into the court. It's well lit, and it's definitely been a great placemaking initiative. The final project I wanted to mention was in Custom House Square. This is a kinetic sculpture called Silver Current, and it was installed in Custom House Square. The initiative was headed by DATMA, which stands for Design, Art, Technology, Massachusetts, and was a collaborative effort with various city partners. The installation was part of a public event series called Summer Winds, in which the piece was displayed from July through September of 2019. The kinetic sculpture was made of silver plastic film, which you might be able to see closely here, was affixed to a large net, and you could also hear the pieces moving in the wind. So finally, to wrap up, I just wanted to emphasize that these placemaking initiatives and several of our initiatives are made possible with continuous partnerships. So enhancements, public arts, we work closely by fostering relationships, strong relationships among our city departments, state entities like Mass Development, local colleges and universities, and partnering with organizations and project consultants as well. I know that today we're probably going to be talking a bit more about current events and how they intersect with our planning work. And New Bedford is continuing to adapt to the current climate as we move ahead in our initiatives. So with that, I want to thank you all very much, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Kirsten. I don't know, my internet service just died. Unfortunately, it came back on in time for me to introduce Patrick. So our next speaker is Patrick McMahon. Again, he's the CEO of the Connecticut Main Street Center, and he's going to bring us perspective from our neighbors in Connecticut. Thank you, Patrick.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I'm a big fan of Rhode Island, having grown up here in Connecticut. I've obviously been very close, made plenty of trips to the Rhode Island beaches, East Beach and Squamicut, through Westerly, which is an amazing downtown. You got a beautiful state. My son's a Boy Scout, and we go to Camp Yagug. So Rhode Island definitely has a really special place in our family's perspective. I'm the CEO of Connecticut Main Street Center. We are a statewide nonprofit organization. We are part of a national movement for Main Streets, the National Main Street Center, also known as Main Street America. That was started 40 years ago. It was through the National Trust for Historic Preservation. It was at a time that our historic downtowns were facing significant disinvestment. There was new suburbanization, and because of the automobile, obviously the strip retail and the new housing out further away from our core cities. And so our downtowns were suffering. And so the National Main Street Center came up with a certain approach to downtown revitalization. That's probably one of the most successful economic development strategies across the country. At Connecticut Main Street Center, we are the state coordinating program. We have worked with about 13 different downtown special services districts or nonprofit Main Street programs. We have 34 other communities that are affiliate communities where we work mostly with the CEO of the community or their town planner, their economic developer. We also have a couple of regional members. So all in all, we're working with 80 plus communities of the 169 in the state. We have education and training programs throughout the year. As you can see from these pictures on the screen, we won't be doing the in-person anytime soon. We'll continue to do these webinars and other trainings by Zoom until it's safe to resume. But it's really wonderful to be able to share best practices that we learn throughout the state with our communities. We have networking events where we will highlight a specific community. We'll go and visit, have the local officials give a presentation about what their initiatives are, do a walking tour of the downtown, and then share some cocktails after. And it's a great way to share resources, get to know each other, so that, you know, the big thing is, you know who you can call when you have a question. And we are we are the statewide resource center, and anybody can contact us at any time for information. We get calls about, you know, if we want to do a streetscape project, where can we find funding? We want to do a facade program. Do other communities already have the program guidelines so we don't have to recreate the wheel? We also do advocacy. Connecticut Main Street Center, along with the Town Planners Association, the Economic Developers Association, we pitched tax increment financing legislation in 2015 so that it was a municipal option rather than a state option. That's been very successful in the communities that have adopted TIF to date. We're pitching really hard for an increase to our state historic tax credit program, which has been really robust and is so necessary for gap financing on our historic properties. And we've been really aggressive over the last couple of years on pedestrian safety, trying to reduce the vehicle speeds in our downtowns on the state routes, and crosswalk safety. It's crazy right now in Connecticut. You actually have to step into the roadway for the vehicle to actually be required to stop. Even if you're standing there on the side of the road indicating that you want to cross, that's not sufficient. Today, you actually have to step in. So we got to change things like that and make our downtowns more pedestrian safe. We, over the course of this last legislative session, a downtown working group of the legislature was created. So that's something that you know, the folks in the Rhode Island legislature might want to consider. We see Main Street as utilizing historic preservation and place-based economic development strategies. Hopefully everybody's heard of ABCD, asset-based community and economic development. We got to identify what are the things that are going to attract people to your community. What are the unique stories that you can tell that will draw visitors and shoppers and hopefully residents to live downtown. Having residents live downtown is really critical. We have a program called Come Home to Downtown, where we are incentivizing the reuse of upper stories of historic buildings to have more residential units downtown, so that there's more spending power. And so that's something that other communities can try to replicate. The Main Street approach, the National Main Street approach, is based on 4 points. Organization. Someone locally has to be driving the bus. Who's responsible? Whether it's a local chamber of commerce, a nonprofit Main Street program, a special services district, someone's got to be minding the store, and who is that? And who's sort of being the facilitator and bringing everybody together, communicating with the local businesses, communicating with the property owners. Design is the second point, and that is how are the streets in relation to the buildings? Are the sidewalks wide enough? Where's the public parking? Is there signage, wayfinding signage that will direct people to the appropriate locations? Do you have design guidelines relative to the design of the buildings themselves so that they look attractive and fit in? Promotions is the third point. You got to have events and other promotions that will draw people to your downtown, specials through the businesses, that type of thing. And then economic vitality is the fourth point. Do you know your market? Who can you attract to your downtown? When you have problem properties, what are the tools that could be brought to bear to try to get the buildings reutilized so that they add to the grand list and produce both the tax revenue and just the economic and social value for the downtowns. The one thing I really want to make sure everybody gets this morning is that main streets must be managed much like a mall. Someone has to be interceding with the property owners and businesses. For 20 years, I worked as a local economic developer. I know with that hat on, in most communities, you're one person, maybe a department of 2 or 3. You don't have the focus of just your downtown. You have to be trying to grow the grand list throughout the community. So it's really important that someone has the Main Street as part of their responsibilities and is moving a work plan forward each year. How's COVID affecting our downtowns? Obviously, we need to support our small businesses. This is a critical time. These government required closures, which are obviously much required to prevent the COVID spread, but it's having a huge impact on our small businesses. A survey by the National Main Street Center said that potentially 3.5 million small businesses could potentially close because of this COVID. So we could be facing some significant new vacancies that we're going to have to deal with. In the whole opening of the new businesses, consumers may not be ready. So businesses have to understand that even if they open the doors, it could be 2-3 months before they're going to see any pre-COVID level sales happening. It's been great that the federal government has done the PPP, Payroll Protection Program, and the EIDL program, but it's insufficient. Hopefully there's going to be another tranche. The second tranche is likely to be fully utilized in the next couple of weeks. The other problem is a lot of the real small businesses have not actually tapped into the federal funding. So states and communities, several communities in Connecticut are utilizing CDBG funds to create low interest loans or even grant programs. In the city of Hartford, some private sector businesses, the city and a public foundation created $1 million emergency grant fund. Those are the type of things that we're going to have to do in order for these businesses to survive. We're seeing significant issues with landlord tenants. It's time to negotiate. If the landlords or tenants hold their ground and don't work with each other, we're going to certainly have more vacancies. And the issue is if they are evicted, there's not going to be much of a pool of other businesses to fill those spaces. So it behooves everybody to do the negotiations at this point. We are expecting that state and municipal budgets are going to be very tight, and that's going to impact business services. This is also a time for creativity. These pictures on the screen are in downtown Norwich. We in Connecticut in our first opening phase did not allow indoor seating in restaurants, only outdoor. And communities just stepped to the plate. They started closing down main streets or closing lanes, putting up Jersey barriers, making it so that streets could be utilized for outside dining. Very, very impressive things that are happening. Then e-commerce. The survey by the National Main Street Center said that 63% of the small businesses do not have an online presence. It is critical for all communities right now to work with their small businesses, their mom and pops, to get them online. It'll help them survive this COVID crisis and into the future. If they don't have an online presence, they're basically ceding market share to the Amazon. As local communities, please step to the plate and help your small businesses get linked up. Here in Connecticut, I'm hearing that developers are still looking for projects, and I think that's really encouraging. I'm in contact with architects and engineering firms, and they're still busy. So that's really, really encouraging. Keep up the work, because that's going to be important for the whole recovery phase. We're also very concerned about organizational funding for nonprofits and the arts and culture nonprofits that are out there. We need to find ways to support those organizations during this period of time, because they just add so much value to our communities. We need to keep pushing forward on placemaking and complete streets. Obviously, Grow Smart Rhode Island is great at highlighting these two activities. We can't let COVID stop the momentum relative to this. I'd highly recommend you check out a placemaking crowdsourcing program called Patronicity. Very cool. We also have something here in Connecticut that is using IOBI as a crowdfunding source to do these smaller scale placemaking projects. So we are connected online at ctmainstreet.org. I've also put in the National Main Street website, mainstreet.org. They have a phenomenal resource center right now called Main Street Forward. They've been doing a series of webinars and cut sheets that you can hand out to your businesses. So I highly recommend that you check that out. I look forward to answering questions.
Thank you so much, Patrick. I think we're going to take questions at the end of all the speakers. And feel free to submit those via the chat room, as I said previously. I think Patrick provided a perfect segue to Garrett's talk, in that one thing that he mentioned is it's really, really important to have the local person driving the bus when dealing with Main Street programs and encouraging and establishing Main Street programs. So in Woonsocket, that person is Garrett Mancieri, and we'll hear from him now. Thank you, Garrett.
Good morning. Good morning, Martha. And thank you for moderating this webinar. And thank you to Grow Smart for inviting us to be a part of it. We're always happy to share the good things that are happening up here in the city of Woonsocket. The Downtown Woonsocket Collaborative is the local Main Street board in Woonsocket. We actually started back in 1987 as Main Street 2000. And it actually has taken on a couple of different names since then, but this is our current name, and we're a very talented board of about 24 people, all dedicated to the revitalization of our downtown area. We can move on to the next slide. It's a little bit of history. You know, our board makes up local government, business owners, property owners, investors, community residents, and nonprofit leaders. We can move on to the other slide. So basically, our biggest function that takes up a lot of our time is working on legislation. So back in 2012, the city engaged the CISO group to do a Main Street livability plan, and they gave us a lot of great ideas on how we can revitalize our downtown area, especially our Main Street area. Through that, we actually learned that one of the recommendations was to do a downtown overlay district, and we were able to get that passed 7-0 on the city council back in 2015. And one of the people that helped us out was Jennifer Cisolano, and I just want to give her a shout out because I know she's on a call here with us today. So we miss you up here in Woonsocket, but come back and visit us soon. So one of the big things that we did on there was our permitted uses. And basically we're just trying to streamline exactly what we want to have in our downtown. So that streamlined outdoor cafes, artist studios, galleries, hotels, B&Bs, educational institutions, taverns, bars, restaurants, and cinemas and theaters. So basically what you want to do when you're crafting this is you want to think about what type of businesses you want to have in your district, and just kind of make it easy for them to just move right in without having to worry about zoning laws and that kind of thing. So just trying to think about, what do you want your downtown area to look like, and what that should include. Something we also included was interim uses, and that would be such things as like food trucks, pop-up retail, cultural installations, also farmers markets, theater, musical performances. So basically what can make your town or your city come alive a little bit, and maybe even have businesses try out a space, so that maybe they think, we're not sure if we would really want to commit to the space and invest, $20,000, $30,000 into the space. It allows them to kind of move into the space, still safely, but maybe not having it be totally renovated, to make sure that that business is actually going to work and be successful. Parking reduction was a big thing. As you try to get people to invest and put in millions of dollars into these buildings, we don't have the parking that we normally would in the rest of the city. So we were able to reduce that from 2 spots down to 1 spot for every residential unit. And then it actually led to a lot of the projects that I'm going to talk about later on in the presentation. Another big thing that you really want to work on is a tax stabilization plan. And obviously, if a developer wants to come in and purchase one of these buildings, they don't want to get the full tax bill on the first day. So, we worked it where we actually could freeze the assessment, the current assessment, and then kind of phase it in over time. So 11%, 22%, 33% of the new value. And that actually allows them to occupy the building so that they can afford that full tax bill down the road. We also want to work on work-live units. Also, we trying to streamline breweries and wineries as a way to kind of, engage people, get people down to the downtown area. And actually, we had so much success with the overlay that a couple years after, the city council expanded the overlay district to North Main Street. And you also want to do that too. You want to have a defined area of your downtown, but you also want to see what areas of growth can we do. Can we have this area of expansion, that area of expansion, if it actually works well? Because again, the more people you have in your downtown, the more successful you're going to be. And then the last thing was the micro lofts and office co-ops. And again, you want to think about those things that are popping up and are becoming very, very popular. Obviously it's popular in Providence and Woonsocket and some other communities. So we wanted to bring that to Woonsocket as well too. And they've got a couple of different developments going with those 2 things. What we're working on next is actually non-permitted uses. So again, once you have some success in your downtown, you want to think about, okay, do we want to have a storefront church? Do we want to have a funeral home? Do we want to have a nursing home? Things that maybe not are good for your community, but not necessarily in your arts and cultural district. So that's kind of the next piece that we're working on for right now. We can move on to the next slide. So this is our downtown area. And what I would say to people is, whenever you're trying to decide, what you should include, you want to kind of look at your historic buildings, your areas of potential growth. Obviously, you don't see a circle or a rectangle there because our downtown is a little different. We have different sections that we wanted to include, areas that we felt could benefit from this legislation. So, really take a hard look at your city or your town, and decide what you feel is going to be the actual areas to improve upon, and what it could actually be down the road. So some of these spaces are residential, but we also felt that it was important to include them because they're potential mixed use development opportunities. So you want to include that as well, included in your downtown area, areas of growth as well too. Move on to the next slide. So I just wanted to talk about some of the projects that we have going on. So we've got our private investor that's working on a commuter train and bus service. So we've been working with him for a couple of different years, and hopefully he's getting closer and closer to fruition, which will be a huge thing to connect Woonsocket to Providence and Worcester. We also were fortunate enough to have the governor decide to locate a higher educational center here in Woonsocket. So we do have one in Westerly, and the next one is going to be here in Woonsocket. They've partnered with a couple of different local companies, and it's going to actually provide training for employees to actually get positions in those companies. We've also been working with the state to expand the bike path. So that was done last year throughout our downtown area, and we just have one more section left, working with the state, hopefully in the next couple of years, where we can actually be connected to Massachusetts and then the rest of Rhode Island. So that's a big project that we've been pushing for many years. And we also are working with the Blackstone Valley Tourism Council to relocate the Riverboat Explorer. And that's going to be located in Market Square. Again, you know, another way to bring people down for a nice boat ride in the summertime and early fall. And again, you always want to think about, you know, how can we get more and more people to our downtown area? We've also had success with developments. So I wanted to talk briefly about 122 North Main Street, which is actually a Smart Growth Award winner this year, which we're very happy about. But that is 17 apartments, a brewery, and a shared office co-op. And that was a $1.2 million investment in Woonsocket that was recently completed. The next one that we are excited about is 43 Railroad Street. And they did receive zoning approval, and they're going to have a bunch of apartments and also an art gallery, an ice cream shop, a Mexican restaurant, all located within a nice mill building. So that's a $2 million investment in the city. And we also just secured an offer on a former CYO building on 77 Federal Street. And that's going to be 31 apartments and 4 hotel rooms, assuming we can get the zoning approval for that. And I also wanted to talk about NeighborWorks Blackstone River Valley that's doing a $24 million project on Island Place, and that's going to be apartments, artist studios, and office space. So we can move on to the next slide. And these are some of the buildings that I talked about. So up in the upper left corner is 122 North Main Street, and next to it is 43 Railroad Street, and the one below it is the CYO building and 77 Federal Street. We can move on to the next slide. So we also focus in a lot of different events. So we've got a few signature events that we do for the Downtown Woonsocket Collaborative, and that is Murder at the Museum, Movies on Main. We partner with NeighborWorks and also the City of Woonsocket on Levitt Amp Woonsocket, which is a free summer concert series. And our signature event is Twilight on the Blackstone, which is a 250-person community dinner. And that's been very successful on the Court Street Bridge, which you see in this photo. And obviously, you know, one of the biggest impacts of COVID-19 for us has been the cancellation or postponement of these events due to the large crowds. And we also have the holiday stroll coming up this December. So basically, and I'll talk a little bit about COVID-19, where, you know, it has impacted our businesses. Obviously, many of them had to close and not be operational. We really struggled getting some of them to be virtual and offer gift cards and that kind of thing. But I think for the most part, they've weathered through it. And most of them are all pretty much open, except for our stadium theater, which obviously, you know, needs the higher capacity. They've got 1,200 seats there, and they really need a larger capacity to be able to bring those shows back. But we're definitely looking forward to, you know, having another situation where, you know, we want to make sure that people are prepared for what has happened to them. I think they never anticipated something like this happening. So we want to really be prepared in the future as to how we can, you know, operate where you do have to shut down for a month or two. We never anticipated something like that happening, but I think, you know, we'll be better prepared in the future. And for the most part, we weathered through it, and we're looking forward to better days. So that would be my presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Garrett. We're getting some really good questions in the chat room. So I'm going to start up. They just disappeared from my screen. But there we go. I think this is a good question in terms of looking at multiple communities. So I'm going to address this one to Patrick. This is from Josh O'Neill. What model do you think works best for maintaining downtowns? A downtown improvement district, Merchants Association, a visitors bureau, or perhaps a combination of an entity like those with close government cooperation? Do you find that small businesses and micro enterprises have time to participate in complete streets discussions or workshops on placemaking?
It's a great question about the model for a Main Street program. There's pluses and minuses to each form. Business improvement districts can be very beneficial because you know that you're going to have an annual allocation of funds that can support at least one full-time staff member. You can rely on that each year. You don't have to chase your tail doing the fundraising as much as if it's a strict nonprofit Main Street program. One of the challenges is, though, that the bids, for the most part, are representing the property owners. So you have to know that going in, that it's not necessarily a broad-based format. Ultimately, on the board are property owners. So are the small businesses being represented? Is the government being represented in those discussions? The nonprofit model is also a great way to go. Like Garrett and Woonsocket, they've got the 501c3. If they can gather together enough resources and they use the Main Street 4-point approach, it's very, very powerful. Obviously, you can see what's happening in Woonsocket and the benefit of having that 501c3 in place. If it is a 501c3, I highly recommend that you can still have to have town funding coming into the coffers. It's really tough to have it either a part-time or full-time Main Street manager if the community itself isn't participating. I have seen models where there is the Chamber of Commerce or a Merchants Association. Most of the chambers are really business to business. They don't generally focus on really a comprehensive downtown revitalization initiative. The Downtown Merchants Association can be also very useful if they go beyond just business to business discussions and really look at, you know, the complete streets and the design and some of these other aspects of downtown. And as to the second question related to placemaking, the small businesses better feel invested in making those determinations. They're the ones who are getting impacted, and they need to be at the table. The question is making sure that you have public forums at times that the small businesses can actually participate. Garrett, did you
any
want
of
to
the
weigh
other
in?
any of the other panelists want to weigh in on that question?
No, I'll say that I definitely agree with what Patrick said. And, you know, the struggle for us is that, you know, we've struggled as a state and as a community to figure out, you know, what the level of funding should be, and trying to, you know, generate that kind of money for that has been a challenge, you know, but we've made some progress in trying to convince people that it is worth it to have a Main Street state program. We're just hoping that one day we can be in better financial state to actually make that happen and do some of those programs that we talked about.
For the designated Main Street programs across the country, they require compiling statistics as to the new job growth, new businesses opening, the amount of investment in new building permits. And if you can compile those statistics and you know, keep track and promote those, you tend to have a better shot of securing the funding.
Kirsten,
And I was just going to second Patrick's point about connecting with business owners, and I think it's critical to make sure that those opportunities are available at times that work for the community. So that's something that our department works towards, creating you know, flexible time slots to speak with and reach the community.
Those are all really good points. We have another question that's very difficult, but I'm going to share it with our panelists and hope that we can do some forward projecting. This is from Jeff Max Tudis, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing anyone's names. How do you think social distancing will impact downtown businesses and restaurants in the future? Anybody want to jump in on this?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that social distancing obviously is a challenge for businesses, especially our restaurants, where, you know, we were fortunate where we were a little bit more prepared than some of the other communities where we already had outdoor dining within the downtown area. So those particular restaurants were a little bit easier to adapt to that. And some of them, you know, do have challenges in terms of their space as to like how much, you know, airflow they can allow into their spaces and that kind of thing. Fortunately, we are in the summertime, so that's a benefit for us, huge benefit. And you know, where we can open those windows and kind of have that airflow. But, you know, the occupancy is what it is. I think people, for the most part, understand that it's better to have, you know, less people with the virus, because that ultimately is going to lead to these businesses being back open fully 100%. So we have had great compliance with, you know, wearing face masks and staying away from people and keeping the distance. So we just have to continue to comply. You know, Rhode Island has done very well in terms of that, and we're just hoping to get back to that level so people have been complying with it, with the anticipation that we can get back to normal sooner.
There's a psychology behind shopping and wanting to go out to restaurants. People are going to have to feel comfortable. And so we're recommending for our communities that they work with their small businesses and actually do videos. Don't just put out a sign saying that you're complying with you know, the CDC requirements. Do a video demonstrating the different precautions that you've taken as a business to have your location sanitized, how you're going to social distance, where the table's going to be, what's the circulation in your shop or your restaurant. And that's going to help make the patrons more comfortable, more likely to actually come to your establishment.
So I would add that, you know, it's a great question, and I think it's just so much to be seen at this point, given the dynamic situation. Businesses have been reaching consumers by offering takeout, delivery options. The mayor of our city, Mayor John Mitchell, has just launched a restaurant reopening advisory board that's actually headed by our director, Tabitha Harkin. So they're working together in a collaborative group to figure out how to create opportunities for safe, social distanced opportunities for going to restaurants. So I think, you know, it's challenging to say, but businesses have definitely been impacted in terms of the hours of operation that they have, offering, you know, limited hours to pick up. So more to come, but we're hopeful that things will get better.
So I'm going to try to take the questions in the order that I see them pop up. We do have a question from Patricia Raub, who is asking a question that's also related to social distancing, I think. And this question probably would have had a completely different answer several months ago than it does today. The question is, what role can public transportation play in Main Street revitalization?
I would add.
Okay, go, Kirsten, thank you.
Sure. I would add that public transportation can play a large role in revitalization because it's all about access. So in New Bedford, our bus terminal is accessible through one of our main streets. So there's a lot of activity in that area, and it's in a site that's really in the heart of downtown. I think having accessibility for several modes of transportation is certainly helpful. Bike paths, safe sidewalks, and making sure that you have access to the spaces that you would like people to go is critical for revitalization.
Excellent points. Anybody else want to respond to this question?
In Connecticut, we're going to plow forward with investments on what's called the Hartford line for commuter rail. Transit-oriented development is still going to take place. It's the smart growth initiative to do that rather than sprawling, single-family development in the state. So we're going to probably double down on those investments around transit corridors.
Thank you. We have a question from Amy Cola. Can any of the speakers please address the level of residential rents in these areas, whether there are any that are for low and moderate income households, if there is increasing gentrification in surrounding areas? I'm sure each town is dealing with this differently, but it's a great question.
I guess I'll start. So Woonsocket does meet our
Should we jump in? So I think that Martha and Garrett are both frozen at this point in time. So
Are we there still?
John,
Yes.
yeah, Patrick and Kirsten are still here.
Okay. It looks like we've had some malfunction. And it's not clear to me if we're still live.
Okay, well, let's continue as if we were. So,
I'm back.
so the question was about rents in
Could I
downtown,
get,
and I think part of a lot of our historic downtowns, there's naturally occurring affordable housing, unless you are in a hot market. So there may be a city or two in Rhode Island that would be considered a hotter market where you might be concerned about gentrification. In most of our downtowns that are historic and they absolutely need investment. And in fact, having market rate isn't going to be much different than the affordable. So it's really important that we do try to get that investment in historic tax credits or other funding streams to fix up these buildings and try to encourage more residential uses and units downtowns. Kirsten, you have anything?
I think
I
Martha
would-
may be, yeah, I'm sorry. I think Martha may be frozen. But go ahead, Kirsten.
Sure. I'm just looking back to the question here. So I'll talk a little bit about gentrification. So we are working on a New Bedford transit-oriented development project right now. It's an 18-month-long study, and it's all focused around the anticipated rail platforms coming to New Bedford. There are two. So we are connecting closely with the community because we have heard that gentrification is a concern. There are concerns about how the landscape might change, how the community, surrounding communities might change within the transit-oriented development study areas. So I think it's really critical to ensure constant communication with your communities. During this time of COVID, we're working creatively to, as I mentioned before, create expanded opportunities to connect. And that means offering flexible time slots, looking for multiple ways to communicate with people, and also taking into account that there might be limited access for some people to have a Zoom call, for example. So that's definitely something that we've heard, and we're working closely with the community to discuss further.
thank you very much. I'm having computer issues. I don't know if everybody else is. I've lost the chat room for some reason. So I'm going to ask a question that I had prepared ahead of time. And what we've been seeing a lot in the press is that people are leaving the largest cities in favor of the smaller cities due to the COVID situation. And I'm wondering if maybe this is an opportunity for Main Street. Do any of the panelists think that there might be a benefit here where people are more likely to want to live in smaller communities with main streets and have that community connection, as opposed to the really large cities where they may not be feeling as safe anymore?
Yeah, I can start. So when we did the 122 North Main Street project, there was a lot of debate in the community as to whether the apartments would get rented out or not. You know, many people felt like many people wouldn't want to live downtown and that kind of attitude. But we totally disregarded that and moved forward. And I can say that we rented them out within 1 month of actually being open. So there was a very high demand. We actually had many people from Massachusetts choose to move down to Woonsocket and come to Rhode Island, mostly due to the affordability of it, and also just the quality of the work that was done. And they like the environment, you know, like Martha said. I mean, it's kind of city living without having, you know, insane amounts of traffic, and you actually have parking available and that kind of thing. So I think that's a great way for us to market ourselves, you know, our Main Street communities, that it's still kind of that urban living without having, you know, an excessive amount of people living in one particular area, which I think is going to be the more of the trend, you know. So we do have a walkable community where you can walk to the Stadium Theater, where you can walk to the local restaurants and local shops. So I think, you know, ultimately it's a great opportunity for us to capitalize, and that's why you see a lot of the projects that I talked about happening in Woonsocket. And I think for the most part, we're going to be very successful renting out those apartments.
Does anyone else want to weigh in on that question?
I think this is a great time for the smaller cities to capitalize on, you know, the issues related to folks leaving the larger cities. The bottom line is, even though you heard that millennials all wanted to live in cities, once they have gotten to the point of family life, they're going to want to be in a location that is nearby, within 20 minutes of a city, whether that's Providence or Boston, Hartford, New Haven. But they're going to ask that their local communities that they're living in, that they have a downtown that has a mix of uses that will attract them downtown for shops and restaurants. And so that's going to be a movement certainly in the next few years.
I would add that, so New Bedford is actually the 6th largest municipality in Massachusetts. But even so, it definitely has a really connected community feel to it. And downtown, there are just so many great partnerships in the marketing of downtown and the maintenance of downtown. So I think that community feel within a city is definitely something that's very attractive.
Thank you. I've lost some of the questions that were posed earlier, but I do recall there was one from Brian Goldberg, and I'm going to paraphrase. His question was about how to manage mixed uses, where you might have entertainment uses near to residential uses as part of revitalizing Main Street. Does anyone want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think there are restrictions that you can put in place that are not going to severely impact the cultural entertainment district, if you will. You know, obviously we have stronger limits on, you know, excessive noise after a certain time. And you have to put in those kind of things if you're going to live in a downtown area. You know, you obviously not going to be like living in a small, quiet little dead end area either. So I think both sides have to work a little bit with each other, where, you know, even though they might be open until, you know, 11 or 12 or 1 o'clock in the morning, you have to limit the noise level, obviously. And also with some of the mixed use developments, you might have to do, you know, additional insulation between the floors. So those kind of things that we've been working on. But obviously the model works. I mean, mixed use development is done all over the country and it's been successful. And you just have to kind of marriage the two as to like a little bit of give on and take on both sides. So.
I would
Martha,
say,
I have a, okay, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, you know, to Garrett's point, I think hours of operation play a large role too, and also in assessing the mix. So, you know, residential units in our downtown are typically on the upper floors, while we have the commercial on the lower level floors. But again, our downtown community in particular, we have organizations, nonprofits like DNB Inc. that work closely with business owners and also residents. So if there are any concerns about that, I think bringing people together to find an optimal solution, communication is definitely key at this time.
So Brian's other part of his question was, how might there be a rebalancing of interests in response to accelerated change in retail, et cetera, post-COVID?
I'm not sure I understand this question when we say rebalancing of interests. Do you mean like some of those?
I think what he's asking is there's going to be a very much of an interest in getting businesses back and running and reinvigorating main streets. And is that going to be even more difficult to do post-COVID?
I think it's similar to, or I guess I think the response here might be similar to a previous question about social distancing and things opening back up. And I think it's a combination. So how long things are going to be distanced, and then to Patrick's point, how comfortable people are even once things are open again. So I think both of those factors will really play into how the interests are going to lie, and also, be balanced afterwards or moving forward.
I think even before COVID, we've seen a trend with, especially in retail, where they're looking for more smaller spaces. And I think that's going to continue, obviously, as people have learned now to shop more virtually. Obviously, businesses need to be prepared for that as to how they're going to purchase things, even if it's purchase online and pick up in the store. There's going to be a lot more of that. I don't see that trend going away so much. So, obviously, I'll give you an example. Like, we have a very large building in Woonsocket, a commercial block building that we call it, and it's got a lot of retail spaces in there. And I don't anticipate somebody coming in and saying, I'm going to take 3 or 4 of those spaces. I think they actually probably need to be divided up even more into these small spaces that people feel more comfortable in, and also just they can also afford more, because let's face it, there's going to be a decrease in activity for a short amount of time here. And we need to make sure that these businesses get into a space that they can afford to pay the rent. If a situation like this happens in the future where they're, shut down for a month or 2, they need to be prepared for that. Do you have, 2 or 3 months rent in reserve so that you can weather through that storm? I think that's even more important. I think some of those business owners kind of struggle with that. They kind of, know how to do their thing, but they don't necessarily need to know how to have a business plan, how to have a finance plan, a budget. I think that's going to be even more important for them to have going forward, so that they can prepare for something like this to happen in the future.
And I keep thinking that this situation may help a little bit in terms of people being less likely to shop in big box stores and more likely to patronize small businesses on Main Street. So if there's a silver lining, I'm hoping that people spending time on Main Street and patronizing local businesses and smaller businesses might be an outcome. Does anybody want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I think at this point in time, it's really important for the communities to talk about shopping local. The statistics are quite clear that if someone patronizes a local business, the money circulates within the community far more than if you go to one of the big box stores and essentially what you just spent is likely leaving your state. So having a move towards local purchasing makes a big difference on our main street, certainly.
We have a question from Suzanne Marcus. You've all mentioned the impact of COVID-19. Do you have something to say about Main Street development as a way to bring more social justice to our communities? Great question.
Well, for Connecticut, Main Street, we highlight as one of our core values is inclusiveness. The bottom line is that our downtowns and our neighborhood commercial districts should absolutely be open to everybody, regardless of what their background is. And it's going to be really important going forward that we make investments in our housing, in our small business, in entrepreneurship, so that we can build all of the communities and everybody has the opportunity to make a living wage and to enjoy their communities.
Yeah, we also prioritize diversity in Woonsocket. With the 11 amp concert that I mentioned, that actually forces us to bring in a whole bunch of different acts from all different genres, all different types of music, and we want people to feel like this is your community too. It is a struggle to get a business for every single, ethnic group in your community, but we definitely try to do our best to reach out to the different communities, get them engaged, get them to be more active in the community, and make them feel like this is their downtown area as well too. So we're constantly thinking about ways we can, introduce diversity and kind of increase that participation in our community.
And part of that potentially is on boards of directors to ensure that there is diversity in the decision-making panels. That's critical. And I think community outreach. Some communities, you have to reach out to them. They're not necessarily gonna come to the meetings that are established by the local government. Sometimes you're gonna have your meetings in that neighborhood commercial district or wherever the location is, and really reach out to them, reach out through surveys, whatever it takes to make sure that their voices are heard.
And I agree with both of the points of Patrick and Garrett. I would say that, main streets are critical because when there are parades or peaceful protests, they generally take place along main streets in municipalities. So I feel New Bedford, works hard to ensure that everyone has opportunities to develop in the city, and also be able to utilize the streets in a creative way to make their voices heard.
Thank you. Excellent input. On my screen, I don't see any further questions, and we are supposed to conclude between 11 and 11:15. So I think this is a good opportunity to do that. I apologize if I missed anyone's question. My chat box did disappear, so I've tried to address what's popped up since it disappeared, and I'm sorry if I didn't get to everyone's question. Thank you all so much for joining this discussion. It's been really interesting, and I hope technologically it worked as well as it could. Thank you very, very much to our speakers. We had heard great comments today. And I hope everyone will participate in future Grow Smart Rhode Island webinars. There'll be one every week. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Martha.
Yep.
Bye-bye.